At the University of Amsterdam, we are here to gain knowledge, do research, and hopefully graduate. With these degrees, we will be able to build careers, become researchers, advisors, and maybe even the policy makers of the future.
But what will the future bring us? With a globalizing economy and digitalization, it's hard to predict.
Does it still make sense to study accountancy if it might be replaced by artificial intelligence in the future?
Are the skills that I developed during my studies sufficient enough to get a job? Or should I take that extra minor in programming on top of my regular curriculum?
One thing is sure, for the Dutch educational system to remain on top of the world, it will have to adapt to the technological and technological advancements and globalization.
My name is Leonie, this is Olaf, and we are both studying economics and business here at the University of Amsterdam. And today we have the honor to discuss our education system together with the Minister of Education, Culture and Science herself. The Minister, Ingrid van Engelshoven, is part of Democrat 66, the education or the party that is sometimes even referred to as the Education Party, and therefore we are really happy to have her on stage today.
Throughout the interview, there will be possibilities for audience questions. Just raise your hand once the opportunity presents itself, and Arthur, standing right there with the audience mic, will head your way. For now, please give a warm welcome for Ingrid van Engelshoven. Welcome.
So, again, welcome.
Thank you.
Mrs. van Engelshoven, you studied at Nijmegen University and at Leiden University.
I did.
How was that time? How do you experience that?
Well, it's your student days are always one of the best times in your life. So I would say to all students, enjoy your time at university. Well, it was the 80s. I started studying political science in Nijmegen. And well, in those days we thought, well, that's studying for unemployment, because youth unemployment was huge. And certainly with a study as political science, well, chances weren't that high. But I did had a job before I graduated at D66, working in Parliament. And then people always teased me that, I did a lot of the support for members of Parliament on in the field of justice, but I didn't went to law school. No. So then I decided, well, get rid of the jokes and do law school. So I studied law in Leiden during my as a part-time student.
You were pretty busy actually as a student then.
Yes, and if I look back, because it's more than 30 years ago now, and look back, I started working when I was 21, and since then I never had the time to take more than 4 weeks off, and I think having leap years these days is very popular, and that's something I always regretted. I never did it, and maybe when I retire, I will have finally my leap year.
So we should all go on leap years as students.
Well, I think traveling and see something of the world, doing something more than just being busy graduating, is I think very worthwhile. And I did lots of things except studying. But if I do it all over again, I would take those months or a year to see a little more of the world.
Would you say that you still use a lot of the stuff that you've learned during your time as a student?
Yes, I do think so. I think a lot of the one of the things I learned is analyzing this process of decision making, analyzing political situations. Think in an analytic matter. I think that's the most important. And when I was in Nijmegen, I learned how to write a good piece. So, and that's still very useful. Having the skills to write, to analyze, and to write and to memorize fast.
You were head of the D66 department in Nijmegen, right?
Yes.
Has that added a lot of to your education?
Yes, because well, I studied political science, and I thought, well, it would be nice to practice what I learned. So I practiced this in local politics, and I learned a lot from it. It was good for my network, but also I learned. You learn how decision making works in a very practical sense. I became responsible for writing an election program on deciding who will be on our city council. And there was we had some riots in those days in Nijmegen because of housing problems, and also the decision making by the local administration in a crisis situation. I learned a lot from it.
And do you think that preparing yourself for the future, for a future career, should be the goal of education, in a sense?
I think you should do more than just preparing for a future career. Of course, it's good when education leads to a future career, but I think education, first and for all, is about Bildung, how to become a good citizen, how to learn to go around in the complex world we live in. And of course, having a career is also part of that, but education is much more than just preparing for a job.
But on the other hand, there's also this practical side to leading education. There's a limited amount of money. For example, the HBO's programs were claimed to produce too many students for the amount of jobs that were available. How do you reconcile this as a dilemma? Do you see this as a dilemma?
Well, we always have to look at how many students we can have in what field. We now have an enormous shortage in technical skilled students, so we could use a little more, and from some types of graduates we have too much, and it's always there's always the part of people should have free choice, should have passion for what they do, but there's also what do we as a society need, what does our economy needs, and as you say, there's always resources are always scarce, so yes, there are choices to be made, and I also have to look at quality of education. I have to look at accessibility of education, but I also have to look at how effective is it for our society.
Yeah, so that's actually what you are, of course, currently doing, like reconsidering whether study programs are still serving that purpose of.
Yes, we just had a advice, for example, for in vocational training to reduce the amount of people trained for artists and desktop publishing. So we're looking into that, and the conclusion could be that we're going to have less students trained there.
So do you see this? The economy is globalizing to a large extent, and competition is becoming, and it's becoming more and more important for countries to position themselves in this global economy. Do you see the education system as an active way of positioning the Netherlands in the global economy?
Yes, and to position yourself in the global world, we need a lot of high-skilled people, and we need a very good quality education system. The Netherlands is still doing very good, but that's never a given. So we all have to look at is our quality of education good enough? How do we do in international competition? Do we attract international talent in science? So there's a lot of things to consider, but our international position in this world is never a given, So it's always something you have to pay attention to. Are we keeping our position? And we recently saw a report published from the Inspectorate for Education, which says, well, in vocational training and higher education, we do very good, but in primary and secondary education, we really see some problems in, we're still doing, if you look at the world ranks, we do very good, but we're doing less good than we used to. So yes, we have to pay attention, and it's never a given.
Okay. Then one other important goal of education is that it's, of course, equalizing our society. It's one of the main purposes of education, I think. But to what extent does education lay the foundation for equalization in society?
Education should be all about equal opportunities in society, and what we see is there are for a lot of children, for a lot of young people, the barriers are still too high.
Yeah.
And what we have to do is invest from a very early age, because what we know is that staying behind in education and development starts at a very young age, and once, for example, when there is a gap in language, for example, by the age of 6, the barrier will stay there for the rest of your life. So that's why the government we do invest this coalition extra in very early age education for children. And what we are trying to do is creating equal opportunities for everyone, for example, by creating another funding system in vocational training. So if you need a year more in education, it isn't the institution doesn't get lack of funding. By year 5 you're there. So there are all kind of mechanisms that should make it easier to go through the education system step by step.
Yeah.
And for example, if you go from secondary education, you go first to a vocational training and then decide, oh, I still want to go to university or to higher education. We should make that easier and more possible.
Because there still is a sort of not really like there are equal opportunities, but we still see that a lot of people from different backgrounds have certain successes or go to university, for example. Do you think that will change within a short period of time? Or
I hope so, and we're doing our best. But well, you say there are equal opportunities for everyone. The conclusions we drew a couple of years ago, there aren't equal opportunities for everyone in the Netherlands, and that's for a rich country as the Netherlands. That's a very hard conclusion to draw. Is that it still matters in which part of town you are born. It still matters what background your parents have, what kind of income your parents have, in having equal opportunities in education. And that's something that's unacceptable. So we have to work really hard on that to make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to get all, to develop all your talents.
But to what extent is that even possible? You see a large increase. There's between 2010 and 2015, there is almost a 50 million euro increase in expenditures on tutorship. There must be a limit to what education could do.
Yes, there is a limit in what education can do. There's also a limit in resources. I see people here protesting. They want more investments in education.
Yeah.
Well, we do invest education in this period. We do invest 1.9 billion in education. There isn't an area where this cabinet invests so much as in education, and still, of course, we could spend more. And of course,
Yeah.
there are difficult decisions for me to make in whether we made a choice in giving it to salaries in primary education because they were lagging behind in work pressure in primary education.
Yeah.
Yes, are there problems in secondary education? Sure, there are.
Yeah.
But there are limited resources, and there's also a lot of problems we can solve within the existing budget.
So now you put a higher priority on basic education, on primary education, than on the later.
Yes, because there were in primary education we saw that salaries were really lacking behind. There was work pressure. We have a shortage in teachers, and of course there's also a high work pressure in higher education. Of course there is, but I can't just solve it with extra money. Of course there is. We just made an agreement with the students' bodies and with the peak organizations to really handle also the work pressure in higher education. But it's also about too much administration. I hope universities, and they have room for it, will invest in more teachers, in smaller groups. They have the possibilities because there is extra money as well.
Yeah. I think it's a good time to turn to the audience. Is there someone with a burning question on their mind?
Maybe.
Go for it.
If I may, two questions, one being really short. How many students do you think are enrolled in like those small-scale classes here at the Economics and Business faculty? How many students are enrolled for one of those working groups?
I really don't know. I don't have that kind of exact figures in my head. But I think you know.
Yes, I know. It's about, do I need a microphone? All right, it's about 40 students enrolled in the small-scale working groups in which we want to educate them in a critical, educate them and get them into critical thinking economists. Do you think that it's possible when we have our small-scale classes are going to be with 40 students?
Well, there are choices to be made by universities and by institutions themselves. What I said is to them, and where we agreed on how to spend the extra money there is the student loan money, growing step by step to 800 million euros. Will be divided between universities, and it's up to the universities itself, the teachers and the students, in how to spend this money. And if a university says we want more smaller scale working groups, that's a choice they can make. It's not up to me to decide. When it comes to quality of education within a university, it's not up to me to decide how to organize. It's up to universities, the teachers, and the students themselves.
So
I think it's not up to me in deciding how a university or an institution should organize. It's up to them.
Okay, that seems to be a clear point. So I hope that answered your question. Are there any other questions we can head on to? Okay.
Saying that Bildung is the way for good education. And it's already a long saying. Also, Jet Besselmaker said Bildung is really important. I work for the Bildung Academy, but I'm really curious how the ministry wants to put this in practice and not let it be just only a saying or a word.
Well, what I'm a decade ago, there was, I think, for example, in primary and secondary education, everyone was saying, well, it's language and math children should learn, and that was it created a kind of atmosphere that was all there was to do. And I'm a fan of what Martha Nussbaum said, is, well, you can, if you learn children how to calculate well, to be good at math, but don't learn them what morality is, well, that's how you get a banking crisis. So I really believe that we should have a curriculum in all kinds of education where you not only learn, you're not only educated for the labor market, but also for society and how to be a good citizens. And that's why, well, in the reviewing of the curriculum, for example, in primary, secondary education, but also in vocational training, but also in higher education, there should be room for teaching children and students how to be good citizens. And well, we're reviewing the curriculum now, so that really should be a part of it. And we also, I signed an agreement with the Organization for Vocational Training in also having citizenships very good on their agenda and making sure everyone gets not only a degree in for a job, but also for society.
This is maybe also the in the regeerakkoord, for example, there was a mention of a societal duty, so the maatschappelijke dienstplicht.
Yeah.
Does that sort of relate maybe to the building program? Is that the sort of importance of creating citizens that is reflected in that certain proposal as well?
Yes, that was the thought behind it, but and well, the maatschappelijke diensttijd, I don't know really how to translate, but it should be voluntarily. Because but I think it can be a good way if it fits you to see something more of society than just your education, and to, for example, involve in healthcare, in volunteer work. And I think people can learn a lot from that.
You said that education should also make citizens. What would your ideal citizen be then? How would you define as a small
I think there's no such thing as the ideal citizens, because ideal society is, in my opinion, a very diverse society with hopefully very diverse citizens, because otherwise I believe society would become not only very boring, but also not very effective in economy, from every goal we should have, because everywhere I think if there's one thing that society needs, but also the labor market needs, is diverse teams. No, there is no ideal citizen.
Concerning diversity, we're here at the University of Amsterdam. And Amsterdam is, of course, the capital city of the Netherlands. I am Dutch, Olaf is Dutch, and you are Dutch, and we are talking in English. Do you consider this a good thing?
Well, there is a lot of discussion about English in higher education, and I think it's important here to say that, well, internationalization of higher education and English in higher education is never a goal per se. It should have added value, and we have to look at, and there are serious issues about can you internationalize education, giving your education in English, and keep up quality. That's the first thing. Keep up quality. Then I think there's what for me is very important is accessibility, and we really have to make sure that in every case all the Dutch students can study in the Netherlands.
Because you do that trend. Do you see that trend that international students are crowding out, so to say, Dutch students? Do you see that scenario happening in the future?
Well, it could be. If we see now from all of the, I believe, 2,500 opleidingen we have, there's only, I think in total 6 with the fixes because of a big influx of international students. So the problem isn't too big at the moment, but there are concerns. And of course, there's a difference between students from within the European Union or from elsewhere. But accessibility is really also a concern, and we have to look at. I think one of the problems we see now is that every university, every institution decides for themselves whether to do the education in English or in Dutch. And no one looks at the whole for the Netherlands. So what I asked from the peak bodies is, well, you have to do this really together and see what the effect on the total situation for higher education in the Netherlands is. And so I will publish, I think, beginning of June, my policy letter on internationalization of Dutch education. And of course, internationalization has added value for the Netherlands. For the Netherlands, it's very important to look at internationalization. International classroom has advantages for students because, well, they come. A lot of them are coming to work in a very international labor environment. They work for maybe even for Dutch companies who are very international oriented. And still the influx of foreign students has a big economic plus for the Netherlands because we need them for the labor market. But there also are a couple of minuses which we have to address. And that's well, and that's not easy because by law I can't differentiate between Dutch students or students coming from elsewhere within the European Union. And what we see at some points is that, well, yes, you want an international classroom, but an international classroom with, well, 60% students from Germany and a couple of Dutch students, that isn't really an international classroom. But how to organize that? It's really, it's really an international classroom, and that's, well, there are a lot of legal issues to address. We're looking into that now. But and what I do think that's important, that when there's this decision made to switch to English for education, that, well, students should have a say, teachers should have a say, and you should not only look at your institution, but look at the broader picture, what's happening in the rest of the Netherlands.
So there is this trend that it's becoming more international. It was 10% in 2007. In 2016, it was 21% was international students. Where do you see this balance ending up? Where would you see the ideal point being?
Well, it's difficult to say. Well, this is the ideal situation. I think you have for every institution, you have to look at, is there added value here?
Okay.
And well, in Belgium they have, for example, a rule by law that not more than percentage X of the education can be in English.
That's
I can say that
something
because the picture is so so diverse. For some types of studies, it's logical to do them in Dutch. For others, it's more logical to do them in English.
So you would
it's all about quality, accessibility. Is the total picture for the Netherlands still in balance? And does it match with the environment? But because how do these international students relate to the city? Do they find housing? Do they stay in the Netherlands or do they leave again? Because if the stay rate is high, international students are
Yeah.
very good for our economy, but if I have to tell our taxpayers that, well, we educate international students who all leave again,
Yeah.
that's a different story. And of
Sorry,
course,
yeah.
there is, and still there is there is added value even when people leave, but there has to be some kind of balance between who stays and who
Understand.
leaves, where do they work.
Yeah, so actually you would say there's not such a thing as a general approach. We have to
No.
look per
Yeah.
institution, per maybe study program, whether it would be fitted.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think, well, if you look at the law, it now says, well, education should be in Dutch,
Yeah.
Yeah.
unless there's a necessity to
Yeah.
do it in English. But that was formulated in 1991. And if you look at the history of the law, it said, well, it was Dutch, and then, well, you had this well, kind of exceptional situation that there was a teacher or a professor from abroad who couldn't teach in Dutch. Well, we live in a totally different reality now, so
Yeah.
maybe it's time to look at legislation and see how can we formulate added value, because that's, for me, that's what it's all about, added value.
So arguably our workforce is becoming more and more English. A lot of the companies that we end up working completely speak English, for example, Philips or Shell. And a lot of the research is done in English. So wouldn't then not only law and Dutch language university studies remain in English? Should the rest just go to
In Dutch, you mean, like
in,
law
in
and
Dutch, indeed? Yeah. Study Dutch and English.
Well, still, I think still that's a
Step too far.
step too fast. Yes, because we also have to look at accessibility for Dutch students. If there are Dutch students who, for whom studying in higher education is already a big step, and then
Also,
have to do it in English, and maybe is too big a step.
Yeah.
So I think it would be good if there is always a choice to do your study in Dutch if you want to, and if there's one city where you can do it, or two, but and still look at the added value. If you do educate in English, you do have to explain to the, I think, to the public and to your students and to your teams what's the added value here. Do we need it for an international classroom? Is it necessary for the labor market? But in some fields, I don't need an English-speaking dentist.
No.
Fair enough.
I don't need an English-speaking doctor. So I hope when I need a lawyer, he speaks Dutch and knows Dutch law.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of fields
In which it's not needed to change.
where it's not necessary and it doesn't have added value.
So,
You already mentioned, like, if international students stay, for example, on the labor market here in the Netherlands, that's a good thing. We need them. But on the other hand, the labor market now is rather competitive. I think within the area of students going to the labor market. And what you now see is that a lot of students are facing a lot of pressure because of that. So they are not only studying, they have part-time jobs, do extracurricular activities, and so on. And now there are students that are suffering a lot from psychological complaints, and even burnouts are occurring more often. What do you think of this problem? Like, do you?
Well, it's certainly a concern, and I think we see all over society that people feel more pressure.
Yeah.
Not only in when you study, but also in your job, but also in everyday life, because there are so much choices to be made. There's so much going on, and you have to not only read the newspaper, but you have to follow social media. So the pressure on people in all of society is higher.
Yeah.
Everything changes faster than it used to. And then you see And I do see that a lot of students feel that pressure as well, because they have to make choices. They are concerned about their position on the labor market. They have to study fast enough.
Yeah.
So what I asked the student unions and the peak bodies and a couple of organizations involved in student welfare to look into the problem and advise me on what measures to take to make sure that we take steps in better student welfare, because I think we all see that there are problems.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have to address it, and because what I saw is that the number of students complaining and having psychological problems, burnouts, is too high. And a part of it, the problem is society as a whole, but a part of it is for some reason due to what they experience at university, and we should really look into it. And so we have this working group, and I hope they will later this year advise me on what's possible and what can universities do to take the pressure of students and to help them.
Do you consider this the role of the education system? Because, of course, the education system is providing us with knowledge and research skills, but not mainly with the practical skills or other activities needed to upgrade your resume.
Well, I think there was always the pressure on students also in my days that you have to study, you have to work on your curriculum. But what we see now is that everything goes faster, and there's more pressure in society. And I do think if you consider from every institution in education to work on Bildung, and it also means that you have to make sure that students are resilient against this pressure in society, and that yes, if it's a problem, universities should also provide students with support in how to handle pressure.
Yeah. So it would actually be a sort of role for the education system to prepare students for the uncertainty of maybe the labor markets or flex working or the
yes,
more
and because
competition.
what you see is, well, yes, some students do feel a lot of pressure, but I think we live in a society where this pressure is all around. Also in your future job, if you want to make a career, there will be pressure, and we have to make students more resilient for pressure, guide them more, and that this is also, in my view, a job where universities should, I think, can do more. And that's exactly why we put this working group in place and look at what could be helpful, look at best practices, because the numbers we saw were really concerning.
I think we have time for another audience question. In the back.
Yes. So my question, you already stressed Bildung quite a lot, and the young lady over here also asked you about it. Bildung is from philosopher von Humboldt, and then later on from philosopher Nussbaum. I was just wondering, so those are philosophers, and we know about it. And Bildung is about an all-round education, getting more broader development. But how do you want to reconcile this with budget cuts in the social sciences? Because there has been increased budget cuts. And if you want to have an all-round development, especially drawing on philosophers, how do you want to reconcile this with budget cuts within the faculty of philosophy, for example?
Well, it isn't the ministry who makes the budget cuts. It's also choices made by university. And yes, resources are limited, and choices have to be made. well, I just we published, for example, the budget for research, and there is room for extra budget for social sciences and the humanities. Yes, and there is more money for the technical studies because there also we faced big problems, and I have to make choices within the budget. The budget isn't unlimited, and it's also, but within universities, it's also the university itself that makes choices. But yes, and that's always the job you have to do. Yes, it is also about making choices, looking at where do we face the highest needs. And later this year, we will start the discussion about how to fund universities. I don't have extra budget. Next to the student loan money, there isn't extra budget. And I signed for a coalition agreement, and that's the budget I have to do it with. So it will also making in shifts within the existing budget, how to make sure that the technical universities get enough money, how to make sure that students who want to have a second choice, who, for example, come from University of Applied Sciences or fell out before and go to study again, how do we fund these second chance studies? So there are a lot of issues to address, but I all have to do it within the existing budget. So yes, choices have to be made, and I think well, building is possible without huge extra funding of the social sciences.
Okay, that's, I think, clear enough. There is a limited budget, and we have to make choices within them. Maybe time for one extra
Yes.
audience question.
Shall we go? Go for it. Very enthusiastic.
Oh, yeah. Can I take it or shall I? Oh, okay, I can. Oh, that's nice. Dear Mrs. van Engelshoven, I'm so happy you came. Let me just say that first of all. And secondly, what we have been talking, if I listened correctly, what we have been talking about a lot is that there is certain responsibilities for students, there is certain responsibilities for universities, and there is certain responsibilities for the ministry. But somehow, I feel like it's still not quite clear as to what we can expect of you exactly. So that is actually my only question. Can you tell me just exactly what I can expect you? What will you do for me when I, as a student, am studying a study in a way that is so long? And I mean, you studied in a time that is long past, and we have to somehow struggle our way through it now. So what will you do for me in order to go through my studies? That's what I want to know.
Well, that's kind of a very broad question. Well, for higher education and for education as a whole, my responsibility is responsibility for the system as a whole. What does that mean? I'm responsible for the funding of all of higher education. And everybody knows that, well, I have to do it within a limited budget. And there is coming extra money to universities from the student loan money, where we made an agreement with the student bodies and universities that they can decide how to invest it in the quality of your education. So I am not the one who is going to decide how we're going to improve education here at University of Amsterdam. It's University of Amsterdam with his students, with the whole of medezeggenschap, so also the teachers. You can make your own decisions how to improve education. The thing that I do is make sure that it's funded. And there will be, well, hundreds of millions extra money going to the university for quality improvement. But the agreement I made is that when I can't decide in how to improve your education, because I don't know what's in all these universities we have and all these institutions we have, what's exactly the problem there and what's the best way to improve education there. So what I said, I give trust and room for the institutions and together with students, they have to decide how. The only thing I'm going to do, I'm going to check, is the money spent the way they agree to spend it? And so if, for example, here at University in Amsterdam, they decide, well, we're going to invest this money in having more teachers, what I'm going to check is, did they really put more teachers in place? That's my role, because I said to Parliament, well, it is public money, and I have to be able to control that public money is well spent. So yes, we will make it possible, but the decisions are going to be made here.
Okay, clear. Thank you very much. Thank you also for the audience questions. Let's now maybe move on to something that we have not really discussed, but it's of course a very interesting topic, which is digitalization. There are a lot of technological improvements, a lot of interesting and exciting advancements coming up. And do you believe that technology could maybe be the solution to lessening work pressure for teachers, for example?
Well, it never will be the solution to solving this problem, but it could be part of the solution. I think what you can do with digitalization is, for example, a part of what's now been given in education is, well, the mass classes where you have kind of look at the books and is kind of very general. You could do it in a digital way, and you see, what you see is fast improvements in digital education. The MOOCs from a couple of years ago are quite old-fashioned already. So you can make use of that to make sure that students could have a smaller scale education, more possibilities to have the possibility to have their questions addressed, to have smaller working groups. So there it could be a solution. It also can be a way in another way of internationalizing education, because you can kind of cherry pick internationally from, I want to follow this course there. So yes, it can be play a role in internationalization. It can be play a role in diminishing work pressure, but it never will be the solution. But it can be. I think it can be a way to make more room for one-on-one contacts and in more real contacts with students, where they can really have their questions addressed.
And are there any concrete plans of, for example, the Dutch government to invest in certain long-term new technologies that will improve this, will help improving the educational system?
Well, we do put extra money in, for example, in the money I have, I invest a lot of extra money in SURF and in SURFnet to improve the quality of the digital facilities for university. And how universities uses them, it's up to them. But I do think for the Netherlands it's very important that we have very good quality of digital infrastructure. And we just had a couple of weeks ago also a discussion, a separate discussion within the cabinet in how we in different fields we should improve the digitalization in the Netherlands, in schools, in universities, in in companies, in government itself.
Yeah.
We
Understand.
we have as a government we have quite a bad track
Yeah.
record in digitalization. Although we had for students very important Duo just introduced
Yeah.
the new. And we had PVS, the new system where all your students' loan are getting paid through, and the system was down for a month,
Yeah.
and
Unfortunately.
because we had to migrate it, but the new system works. So I think
Yeah.
for the first time in a long time we had an ICT project within government that works and is within
Nice.
budget.
Yeah, but this is great indeed. On the other hand, so there are a lot of technologies, and you also say that it's needed, but in the end, it's up to the university or the high school or whatever to implement certain technologies. So
Yes, and well, and it can in when you talk about work pressure, new possibilities to renew and invest in quality of education. I think digitalization can play an important role, but in the end, quality of education I think always come to having good teachers.
Yeah.
And having
Fair enough.
So
this,
that's-
the possibility of the contact with your professor or teacher, because
Yeah.
if you that's always what you remember from education. It's always
Yeah.
where you get inspired, where you learn from, is the interaction with the student-teacher in interaction. So it will
Yeah.
never replace it.
For example, in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of experimentation. You have a lot of very experimental schools where you have algorithms actually giving tests to students personalized on these students. Do you think that the Dutch educational system is flexible enough to experiment with these things and see these things coming up in our education?
Yes, I think it's always good to look at the possibilities, but well, these days I'm not so sure of having everything in education in algorithms is really what the individual student needs, because then it's the system what decides what you're good at, where your questions are, where you want to be challenged, and I think
Well, the idea is that you have to learn a certain amount of things for
Yeah.
math, for example, and then they test the students based on that. And if they really don't understand it, they ask a teacher to explain it to them. So it becomes a way more personalized. But the thing is, for these programs to be created, you need quite a big budget or some investment in these long-term things. And we went through the regeerakkoord, and there don't seem to be any long-term investments. Do you think there should be more focus of the Dutch government on these moonshot ideas in education?
Well, we within the European Commission, within the European Council of Education, we have this kind of discussion now in the Innovation Council. I'm talking with my European colleagues, where in science and in innovation, should we have this kind of missions, we call it moonshot ideas, where not only we invest in the Netherlands, but we do it within Europe, and a better digital agenda in Europe is certainly one of the things that is considered.
I think due to the time, it's already time for our last question. And before we end it, I would like to ask you what you would advise us students on how to prepare best for the future challenges ahead.
That's always a difficult question, because if you try to answer that, you always have the first thing is look at your own what kind of challenges did I meet myself, but I do realize that well, I studied in the 80s and the 90s. That was a different time. But I do think there's always a couple of things. Still, I know the pressure is high, or some students feel the very high pressure. But I think still the time in university is the best time in your life, because well, the whole world is ahead of you, and there's so many choices you still can make. So that's great. Enjoy it. I think you always have to look at not just be in university and study, but look at society around you, and also at a young age think about what role could I fulfill in society now besides studying. And but I think what I learned most of, and I think that's still the best lesson, is make sure you fail sometimes, because if you never fail, you're not that ambitious, maybe. So you always can well
Improve.
put ambition a little higher for yourself. But also from failing sometimes, you learn where am I not good at, and what should I not do. And you learn maybe in a hard way to reflect on yourself. But I really made in my career a couple of big failures, and I learned a lot from it. And I think I wouldn't be in this position now if I didn't have failed then.
Okay, that's a good advice to end on. Before we conclude this interview, I would like to draw your attention to the next interview that Room for Discussion is organizing, which will be on the 18th of May at 5 p.m. with renowned economist Ha-Joon Chung, a South Korean economist on rethinking globalization. So mind that, and please join that discussion as well. But for now, let me please give a warm round of applause to Minister Ingrid van Engelshoven.
Thank you.
And